Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Aspire. My name is Sumaya Hassan. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. I'd like to say a very warm welcome to all our guests in the audience today. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So in today's show, I want us to talk about lessons from Timbuktu. How many of you have heard of Timbuktu? Yes? Some, a little bit, maybe, maybe not. Okay. I'll tell you why I want us to talk about Timbuktu. We've been talking about the era of the great Islamic civilizations in different parts of the world. We've talked about North Africa, very leading global universities, the amazing things the Muslims were doing there. We've talked about south of Spain, Andalusia, Cordoba, the amazing inventions that came out of there. We've talked about Baghdad and the House of Wisdom and how Muslims were leading the world in the sciences and naming the stars and mapping out the galaxies all those centuries ago, 12th century and around. So is it therefore that sub-Saharan Africa was left out of this golden age of Islamic civilization? Is it that the sub-Saharan Africa is the dark continent? Is that the case? And that's what I would want us to talk about today. And to start us off, I want to mention that during the High Middle Ages, as they were called, there are certain regions in Africa, predominantly Islamic regions, that were actually not only great trading centers, but they were also great centers of civilization. Amazing civilizations. That is until the West intruded in those particular regions. Mali was one of these places. You may have heard of the great empires of Mali, Songhai, yes? You may have Ghana. These were some of the amazing African, African through and through empires that we had. Mali was the farthest place on the gold road. Talk a little bit more about that. There was a huge gold trade going on. At the very far end, Mali was one such place at the end of the gold road. Just at the southern edge of the Sahara Desert in Mali, north of the river Niger, for those of you who can picture this in your geography, there was an extremely important trading center on the trans-Saharan caravan route. Trans-Saharan. You need to understand the centuries we are talking about here, we are around about the 14th century. These were international level trading centers that were there, that were trading not only within each other, across the regions, but even outside of the regions. And there were also centers of Islamic culture. One particular city that really stands out, a city of unique beige towers. I urge you to go and look at the, do your online research and see the drawings of the buildings that are in this area. Beige towers, like rising out of the sand, made of clay and sand, almost disappearing into the environment. Amazing architecture. Is a town, a city called Timbuktu. A center of learning. It was a center of culture, extremely distinctive architecture, and the world, it contained one of the world's greatest collections of ancient manuscripts. This is a city in Africa. It is not a city, in Europe or in the West. Now, Timbuktu itself means different things to different people. You may hear it in some narratives, which are not our narratives, that Timbuktu used to be a term, a metaphor for the very farthest corners of the earth. When somebody wanted to say, maybe you live so far away, do you live in Timbuktu? It's that far, because it was really right at the edge. But for us, Timbuktu symbolizes a long tradition of Islamic scholarship and writing, Islamic learning and writing. And so I urge you and I urge the viewers, go and read about Timbuktu, as an African, as a Muslim. you want to read about Timbuktu. You want to understand what was this great center of civilization in the Muslim world, and it is right here in Africa that we need to know about. Timbuktu flourished from trading salt. Salt was big business in those days, really huge. We like our salt today, but if you think about salt only as a condiment to food, you don't appreciate how big a trading item salt was. Absolutely massive. Almost at the same level, not in terms of value, but in terms of how much it was being traded as gold. This was the other thing that Timbuktu was very famous for. It was very famous for ivory as well, and it was part of the Mali Empire in the 14th century. It had a huge university called Sankore University, and this was the center of the scholarly tradition in Mali at this place, the Sankore University. Yes, and it was renowned not only within Mali, but across the continent and beyond. Timbuktu has been designated as a UNESCO World Heritage Site just because of the intense heritage that is there. And now, because unfortunately of late it has run into some unrest, it is actually on the list of World Heritage in danger. Yeah, Timbuktu. So, when we talk about lessons from Timbuktu, who are the scholars in Timbuktu? Like the rest of the Muslim civilization, if you read about the Golden Age in different parts, you find that Timbuktu boasted or hosted very many scholars. Huge number of scholars, different types of scholars. I will only mention a few just for your information. We had Al-Qadi Al-Haji, we had Sheikh Sidi Abu Al-Barakat, Mahmoud ibn Umar, we had Al-Mukhtar bin Muhammad ibn Al-Mukhtar, we had so many, Muhammad Bagayogo. These are indigenous scholars, and they were among the group of scholars that were there at Timbuktu. Important to note, the scholars possessed personal libraries with hundreds and thousands of books. These are their personal libraries, other than other libraries that may be available by themselves. They offered instruction inside mosques, like at Sankore, the mosque itself. The largest collection, mosque colleges in Timbuktu, you'll notice this theme. If you look at what we discussed as far as the universities in the North Africa, in the south of Spain, in Baghdad, universities were very closely associated with the mosque. Higher education actually started in the mosque. This is our history as Muslims. And when we try to split education from the mosque, our decline started. A lot of these universities, whether it is Al-Azhar, whether it is Al-Qawariyyin, there was always a mosque that preceded it, and then the university started from there. And we are hoping, and our challenge is that today's mosques will build on that tradition, that this mosque should give birth to scholars coming here first, hosting halaqas on finance, on accounts. Among us here, we have lawyers, we have people who love mathematics and chemistry, yes? And you can come there and host halaqas in the mosque on those very subjects. And from there, the academies grow out, and from there we have universities growing out. One particularly famous scholar out of Timbuktu. So if you don't know any other scholar, please know this one. He was extremely famous and extremely learned, was called Ahmed Baba. So talk like you know, when people talk about Timbuktu, oh yes, Ahmed Baba, yeah? Know something about Ahmed Baba. Abu al-Abbas, Ahmed ibn Ahmed al-Takruri al-Masufi al-Timbukti. That was his name. If you don't want to cram all of that, just remember Ahmed Baba. He was a teacher, he was a professor, he was a philosopher, he was an Arabic grammarian, he was an author of over 40 books, he was the last chancellor of the University of Sankore. And what you'll realize when you're looking at the scholars of Islam, they didn't have just one discipline, yes? Somebody was an expert in mathematics. He also knew hadith. He could, he could teach hadith. He also had studied philosophy. He probably studied astronomy. So for us as well, we have to go back to that tradition. It is not enough that I may be a medical doctor. and I've stopped there. I should go deep in that. Yes, we need people who are authorities. But what else do you know? You have to read wide, expand your mind. So don't just say, oh no, the ulum of fiqh and the religious sciences are only for the religious scholars. For me, I will, no. That's not our tradition. Our tradition was that we were people who read widely and really understood. Yes? So you find Ahmed Baba in his personal library who had over 1,600 books. Yes? And the University of Sankore, really, as far as the Muslim civilization is concerned, is at the same level as Al-Azhar or Al-Qarawiyyin in Tunisia, or Al-Qarawiyyin, very two similar names in Morocco, Qurtuba in Spain. It's a very high-level university. And what you find, very interesting for you to know, again, when we're looking at the history of Islamic civilizations, the role of the Muslim women is so prominent. So now when we hear Muslim women being deemed to be marginalized or oppressed, we wonder, what narrative are you reading? That this University of Sankore was actually financed by a wealthy Mandinka lady. It was a woman who financed the building of this particular university. The level of the university was such that at that time it had 25,000 students. The city itself had 100,000 residents. So if 25,000, how pervasive was education in that society? It's every fourth person, in every 4 people, that one is a student in such a leading university. You can imagine the culture that was there. And they studied Quran, they studied law, they studied literature, they studied medicine, they studied surgery, they studied physics and chemistry and geography and art, all in this university. So it was very deep. But the students were also taught trades like shoemaking, like construction, like farming, like fishing. So it really covered, both technical, vocational, and professional courses. In the modern times, we are told about 700,000 ancient manuscripts still remain in Timbuktu. 700,000, whether in private libraries, whether in public libraries. Unfortunately, a lot of them have started getting very brittle because of age, or they're being affected by mold or insects. But that is what is still there today. And recently, when there was information about manuscripts being, some people, there was attacks on Timbuktu and they started destroying the manuscripts. The world came up in arms because this is very deep heritage that is being destroyed. Another fact for you to know, the first university in the world, which is Al-Qarawiyyin in Morocco, was also founded by a woman. She was called Fatima Al-Fihri. She used her money to actually get this university built. She supervised the works herself. And one interesting fact about Fatima Al-Fihri, she vowed to fast from the first day the construction began, because it was a mosque and university. And she said, I will fast until this building is completed, 2 years continuously. These are the people in the Islamic tradition. So when we look at how far we have fallen, we need to understand how high had they risen. What are some of the things they did, and what are some of the things that we need to do? The idea of looking back is to understand the very amazing civilizations that were there in the Muslim world, to learn the lessons, reach where they had reached, and then build from there. We need to reclaim this glory, and we need to build on it. So who was the leader? Who was the leader of Timbuktu? The leader was this legendary gentleman called Mansa Musa. Mansa Musa, Mansa is Mandinka, and it means sultan or emperor. So there were several Mansas before him. His name was Musa. So Mansa Musa. I know we have among our audience somebody called Musa. He may want to adopt the title of the Mansa as well. At the time that we are talking about, this is around 1312 when he came to power. At that time, Europe was going through extremely difficult times. It had civil wars, yes? It had a mini ice age. It was suffering from the bubonic plague. Its own production of precious materials was on the decline. It really was having extremely serious challenges. At that time, African kingdoms like Mali were absolutely thriving. They were at the height of their civilization. Deep, very, very rich with natural resources. We spoke about gold and salt. And essentially, they were thriving empires of trade, of commerce, of intellectual centers as well. And pretty much unknown outside of Africa. Pretty much unknown, and we'll talk about how they came to be known. So Europe is suffering through all this, not really knowing what's going on this other side of the world. And these other guys are just doing their thing, you know, absolutely having a blast, and you know, things were going very, very well. Mansa Musa is said to be the richest person of all time, not his time, all time. He was so wealthy that up to now, different researchers and people have tried to estimate how wealthy was this man, and all they can say is his wealth was staggering. So certain estimates, adjusted for inflation, have attempted to put a figure, and that estimate is that he was roughly worth $400 billion. 400 billion US dollars. That's how wealthy he's said to have been. He was an extremely successful military leader. There was a lot of that happening at the time. He had captured 24 cities. And just to let you know the expanse of his empire, it covered parts of modern-day Mauritania. It included Senegal, Gambia, Guinea, Burkina Faso, Mali itself, Nigeria, Niger, Chad. It was just huge. You know, he had a huge expanse of territory. But one very important thing to highlight about Mansa Musa's leadership, as the territory under him grew, so did the economic standing of its citizens. It wasn't just about him. He kept uplifting the people. And whichever new territory he brought on board kept growing. Yes? And he was a very devout Muslim. So he took particular interest in Timbuktu and urbanized it. He built schools, he built mosques, the major university we've spoken about. He also built a legendary mosque in Timbuktu. It still stands there. Jingarber, that mosque, I hope I pronounced that correctly. He brought in an expert architect from Andalusia to build that mosque. And because he was extremely wealthy, he paid him the equivalent, he paid him 200 kilograms of gold to build that mosque. Remember, this time gold was the actual, you know, you are being paid value, not a paper that is supposed to signify value. 200 kilograms of gold. So Mansa Musa was an extremely pious Muslim and decided he wanted to make the pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324. Only 3 other Mansas had gone for Hajj. You need to understand, 1324, people were not flying to Hajj. It took him 1 year of travel, 1 year. The horses and whatever other animals they were using, 1 year of travel from his empire across different African states to get to Hajj. But that also tells you that he must have left a very stable leadership and administration for him to be away for 1 year. You couldn't go away, isn't it? You see places where leaders can't afford to be away for a week. It would be chaotic. He went away for 1 year. Now, Mansa Musa, remember we talked about the richest man ever. When he left to go for Hajj, this was a distance of 4,000 miles. This figure will be important. Just keep that at the back of your mind. His delegation, the people he went with, was 60,000 people. 60,000. Let's go for Hajj. Yeah, 60,000 people, many of whom were carrying gold for him. Yes, he had about 80 to 100 camels, each of which was said to be carrying 300 pounds of gold dust. The magnificence and the wealth of his court just left bystanders speechless. They simply couldn't wrap their heads around the wealth that this man had. Now, on his way to Mecca, he passed via Cairo, just so you understand. You know, people are trying to put an estimate on his wealth, but what we are giving you now are the actual facts so that you understand the impact of his wealth. While they were in Cairo, he was really helping the needy, giving gold to the poor. You know, here, have some gold, you know, help yourself. And then the trade, remember he had 60,000 people in his delegation. The amount of trade they did, the things they were buying in Cairo, and remember they were paying in gold. At the end of it, by the time he was through with Cairo, and he was merely transiting on his way to Mecca, the value of gold in Cairo depreciated so much because he had left so much gold, it took the economy in Egypt 12 years to recover. It was just too much gold. Because he was passing, by the way, you know, just on my way to Hajj, you know, leave a few, tons of gold as I go. And even the other towns and cities he was passing along the way failed. He changed economies just by passing through. That's how wealthy he was. Now, remember we said he was pious. It wasn't just about the wealth. Every Friday, we talked about a distance of 4,000 miles. Every Friday, he would make a stop and he would use his wealth and manpower to build a new mosque. Every Friday, along the route of his pilgrimage. This is the man we are talking about. He also was so keen about education that he made it his mission to recruit the brightest minds. I told you about the architect from Andalusia already. But when he came back from Mecca, he came back with poets, he came back with artists, he came back with intellectuals because he wanted to raise the level of education of his people. This made him extremely well respected. It made him a statesman because it wasn't just about him. He wanted to uplift the people that were in his empire. So this journey to Hajj is what made the West know, oh, there is somebody called Mansa Musa. There's an empire in Mali, in a place called, in West Africa, this place called Timbuktu. So at a time when Europe was in the middle of these very difficult times I've described, there was this fictional picture they painted in their mind, but the fiction was based on reality. There was a paradise at the edge of the Sahara where the gold was flowing, and it was called Timbuktu. And all these people wanted to get to Timbuktu, and many tried. Some along the way fell sick to malaria. Some passing through the desert, they couldn't handle the challenge. Some made it and actually reached the paradise, of Timbuktu. But it was a place where people really wanted to go. And just to show you the level it achieved, and he achieved once he was known in the West, one of the leading, most important maps in Europe at that time actually was made to include his picture. So they drew him looking almost like a European king, but black, because they knew he must be black, in the West and holding all this, gold. And they didn't regard him as a savage. He was regarded as a very sophisticated gentleman, And Mali itself was regarded as a place of extreme wealth and splendor and sophistication. Under Mansa Musa, the empire had over 400 cities with amazing architecture, with deep culture. We've spoken about education. These were cities that had tremendous civilizations. However, unfortunately, and this is why we speak about this, when you look at a lot of the history written by others after that, they don't mention, or they whitewash it. So you don't hear about the vibrance of the Mali Empire, the wealth, the art that was there, the education. People would want to panel beat the narrative to suit them. But again, it is said that unless the lion learns how to write, the narrative will always favor the hunter. So we Africans, we African Muslims, we have to take charge of our own narrative. Who spoke about this continent being dark? Where is that from? This is not our history. So we have to go back into our history so that we ourselves can tell the narrative our way. One of the things Mansa Musa did, he built the largest library the world had ever seen at that time. This is since the Great Library of Alexandria, again in Africa. Yes, that was in Egypt. This library was at Sankore University. We've spoken about the number of pupils the university could hold, which is 25,000. In terms of books and manuscripts, it had more than 1 million. That's just how people took education. They took it seriously. And people would therefore this made Mali a very central point of education and culture in the Muslim world. An important commercial city, and he actually gave royal patronage to all these areas. He threw his own weight and supported the trade, the commerce, the art, the history, the architecture, and that is why you find it took the level that it did. At the end of the day, it is all about leadership. He reigned for 25 years. After he died, he was succeeded by his son. A lot of the buildings that were built during his time are still there to this date. I really hope, inshallah, one day Allah blesses me to be able to go and visit Timbuktu. I would love to go and see this for myself, inshallah. And I hope when you're on to-do list, you'll add some of these amazing sites. Unfortunately, all this newfound attention, when the West and Europe came to learn about this little gem hidden somewhere, it attracted a lot of negative energy. The Portuguese decided to start raiding. So they conducted naval raids against it. Morocco, of course, Morocco was in the north of Africa. Again, the troops went in, they seized control. So between the wars and the invasions, there were all droughts, increasing desertification, and the empire just started declining, as well as the actions of the people themselves. You know, sometimes Allah tells us that He doesn't change the status of a people until you change yourself. So if we become decadent and start becoming complacent, we forget the values that put us there, then you open yourself up to all these attacks and you can see what happens. His legacy was that of a very good administrator. All these countries under him, he had divided them into provinces. The provinces had villages. Each village had a mayor. He had a system and it worked. He collected revenues and used them for the benefit of the people. He diversified the economy. He made sure intellectual centers and educational centers were all over. The rule of law was established and enforced under him, but above all was his piety, his moral and religious principles, which even after he passed away, his subjects continued to follow. So when we look at the history of successful Islamic civilizations, we see the same things wherever they are. We see that things were being done in the name of God. And that's where we started. Iqra bismi rabbika. People read, but not just for the sake, in the name of God. You set up establishments and educational centers for the glory of God. You seek to enhance the status of your people for the glory of God. Everything was in the name of God. The association of higher education with the mosque is something we see repeatedly across. We see that the universalization of knowledge, let people read and in the homes, in the mosques, in the madrasas, in the universities. We see economic diversity. We see a strong tradition of art and culture as well, whether it is in the architecture, whether it is in the drawings. We see a very strong role of the women, very strong role of the women. And then we see, just like the success had a lot of human factors behind it, so did the decline. Yes, verily, Allah does not change the status of a people, whether for good or for bad, until we change what is in ourselves. And these are the lessons we want to take forward to help us re-energize ourselves and rebuild on where they had reached and help us to move forward.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
My name is Athman Abubakar. So my question is on the Timbuktu period. First of all, how long was that period? Which years was that period between that empire? And how did it start up? Is it the Mansa Musa who came and, started it off? Or, that's my question. How did it start?
Okay.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Hamoon Dawood, and my question was, the status of Muslims today is associated with a lot of negativity. For example, in Rohingya, there's the cleansing of Muslims, and in China, they're taken to concentration camps. So I was wondering, how can we go back to our former glory if the world is literally suppressing Muslims all over the world?
My name is Rayan Dawood. I wanted to ask about the influence of culture into the Islamic religion. Is the Islam we're following really what is mandated or cultural? Or influence of culture has entered into the religion we practice now?
Okay, let's start with those and then we can take any others that come after. So Athman asked how long was that period and how did it start? So Timbuktu initially was a trading post. It was a very small trading post, just for purposes of sort of a pause, very small amount of exchanges happening there. But again, This is why you find the role of leadership. You can have a leader who comes in and just revolutionizes an area completely, you know. So the sand in Timbuktu may have been the same, the people may have been the same, but then the leader comes, and that is a catalyst, and decides, this is what I'm going to do for this area. This is how I will uplift my people. So the golden era that we are talking about, Mansa Musa, for instance, came, he took over in about 1312, and he died in 1337. The real decline after that, when the invasion started and the attack started, and then this got exacerbated until over time, you know, Timbuktu unfortunately lost a lot of its glory. I will tell you though, before him, the ruler he took over from, he had been deputizing a ruler called Abu Bakr the second, and he was Abu Bakr's deputy. What happened at that particular time is that even that ruler before him, Abu Bakr II, had decided to go out on an exploration. He wanted to go and explore the farther edges of the Atlantic. So even that ruler was very forward thinking. He wanted to go out and explore. He went on a voyage to go and explore the outer edges of the Atlantic. He didn't come back from the voyage. That is how Mansa Musa then stepped in and took over. So he didn't come in through a conquest, but when the ruler didn't come back from the voyage is how he stepped in. So it was a build-up from other rulers who had been forward-thinking. Then you have that ruler who just comes in and revolutionizes the way everything is done around there. So that is really the period we are looking at. Essentially, yeah, 14th century. Okay, we had Hamoun asking, status of Muslims today is associated with a lot of negativity and oppression. How can we go back? See, one of the things we want to do to help us move forward and reclaim that glory is understand what were the things the people used to do during those periods of the high glory, the high civilizations, what was happening. And the things that I was reading out, for instance, these are some of the things we need to do. We can't talk about it and tell people, oh, do you know what we've done in our history? Why are you being... We can't do that. We have to live it. We have to show it by way of example. And one of the things where we can start is bringing back education to the heart of what we are doing as an ummah, and bringing it back to the mosque, because that's where it started. It doesn't mean that all our universities and educational institutions have to be at the mosque, but it does mean that unless we reclaim our values, that even when we read Bismi Rabbika, in the name of the Lord, then and only then can we start reclaiming this. So sometimes you find people saying, I would love to host tuition on Sunday afternoon. I don't have anywhere to go. Really? There's a mosque in your area and you think you have nowhere to go? Why can't you host your tuition classes right there? But this is what the mosques were known for. All sorts of discussions and debates. We used to receive visitors in the mosque during the time of Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we have to make the mosque back to being the heart of the community. It's not just a musalla, we pray and go, but we pretty much do everything. We have gardens and we sit there and we talk. And if we want to go for coffee, there's a restaurant there. The mosque was the heart of the community. So bringing that back, focusing on education, but universalizing it, that we really, it is said that if you have more clothes and shoes than you have books, then you really want to relook at your life. Where are your priorities? How much are we reading and what are we reading for, and how are we then making this impact others? So this is really part of what we do. We've stopped researching. We used to be leading scientists. We've gone away from that. We have to go back there and be at the forefront of research, of writing. We have to take back the literary tradition as Muslims. We must start writing, but we have to also do a lot of reading. Ryan asked about the influence of culture in the Islamic religion. There is a lot of that. There is a lot of culture in the Islamic religion, and that can be both good and bad. Islam itself is a way of life. You don't need to go outside of that really to know how to live. However, the impact of the local cultures, you will see that in the religion, and that's not always a bad thing. So in terms of architecture, there are places you will go and you will see this is a mosque, and this is the mihrab, but it takes the flavor of the local place. And that's just beautiful. I find when I travel, I love to go and attend prayer in a mosque wherever I am, because regardless of how the mosque looks, regardless of how the people are and how they dress, the prayer will be identical. And I find that so powerful. So those local cultures seep in a way that is actually beautiful. Yes? And this is a good thing. And Allah tells us in the Quran that He created us tribes and nations that we may know each other. And part of us knowing each other is appreciating each other's cultures. On the other hand, the negative side of that is where sometimes Muslims will take a culture. It's not Islamic. They know this is contrary, and they will do that and say, but we've always done things this way. It doesn't matter that you've always done things that way. If it is contrary to the Islamic values and principles, you don't do it. That is where sometimes culture will clash. But otherwise, there are very positive aspects of culture for us to celebrate, where they are not contrary to the principles of the faith. Any other questions or comments?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
My name is Ramadan Bakari. Now, I just have a bit of a comment infused with a question. So you'll just take it as is. So I've just learned from this particular session that we were doing so well until the colonizers came. Now, you've just said that the Portuguese, after they learned about how well the Timbuktu was doing in regards to wealth and all that, and even some were passing, they passed away along the journey coming due to malaria and all these diseases. And we had people who were living in those diseases, who were living in those times, and we had remedies to the issues that they were facing. And like you said, Timbuktu thrived while Europe was had issues on its own. There was the plague and all that. I think it's important that we learn that the education system right now focuses on after colonization, that we forget how things were before. And my main question is, for how long was Timbuktu there before it started becoming colonized, before the colonizers came? For how long did it thrive before colonization took place? Thank you.
Okay. Yes, that is a very important point, Ramadan, that you talk about, that that a lot of the history starts post-colonial history, and whatever is pre-colonial doesn't come out positively at all. All what we've been discussing here today is actually pre-colonial. Remember, the Portuguese were coming in the 14th century. That is when they were coming and starting to, the invasions coming at that particular time. Actually it was the 15th century. This is when they were coming. All those years before that, Timbuktu was there. If we're talking about just one person ruling for 25 years, and there were other rulers and other rulers and other rulers and other rulers before them. If you look at the expanse of land under just that Mali Empire, we haven't talked about the other empires, the Songhai, we haven't talked about Ghana, we haven't talked about all these other things. And these empires were trading not only within each other, they were trading with Egypt, they were trading with North Africa, they were absolutely thriving. But this the foreigners hadn't heard of them. So if you haven't heard of me, does it mean I don't exist? Then the day you come, you discover me all of a sudden. Hey, how do you discover me? I have 4,000 miles under me as a ruler. You cannot discover me. And to your point, that they came, a lot of the explorers died of malaria. How are the people themselves thriving if there was malaria? But if you come thinking you have all the answers, and you don't want to ask the locals, you don't want to ask the indigenous people of that area. And that's a very important lesson in leadership. Don't assume that you know everything. When you go somewhere and you find people, learn from them. You have your own traditions to survive. All these, how do you navigate the desert? Whenever they tried to navigate, they were being attacked. You guys are moving up and down with kilos of gold. How are you surviving? See, there are ways and there are systems in place. But if you come thinking you know everything, then sometimes people leave you to Yes, to find out the hard way that actually you don't know a lot, isn't it? So even the history really needs to be re-looked at. What is the narrative that is being given out there? That we can paint the reality of the picture. The very positive stories coming out of Africa, coming out of the Muslim world, so that we can be proud of ourselves. University of Sankore, it is not only the Muslims that are proud, it is not only the Africans that are proud, the Caribbeans. Afro-Caribbeans are extremely proud of this university globally because of what it is as a global center of academic excellence. Yes? Okay, I think our time is up for today's show. I want to thank all of you here. You've been a great audience. I want to thank all of you at home for watching us. Do join us next week, same time, for another session of Aspire. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.